My father has a farm-based delivery service. My dad receives the job call when he's sitting with his Navajo buddy Travis and his fiancée in Arizona on the Navajo reservation. Travis discusses relatives he hasn't seen in Window Rock and suggests they come. So Dad decided we'll go down together. He can make his delivery quickly, and while Travis visits his family, we can check out the Window Rock, a gigantic rock face with a wide hole that leads to the opposite side. Since my dad's vehicle was filled with freight, we convoyed in different trucks and brought talkie-talkies to communicate. My father and I drive home along the old roadway, followed by Travis and his girlfriend. The road was slippery from previous rain, so we drove slowly. Left of the roadway are sandstone cliffs. On the right is a large field with a barbed wire fence. We climb a hill and notice a huge dog at the bottom, just resting on its haunches beside the rocks. My dad asks, "Do you see that enormous gas dog?" Travis yells over the radio, "It's not a dog, strike it." He continues yelling, "Hit it, hit it, hit it now." As my dad speeds up, I can see it better. It's covered in dark matted hair that looks like dried blood. It's facing the cliffs, but as our headlights strike it, it turns and stares at us. It looks like a bear and a person together. As we approach closer to this monster, we discover it's really very enormous, resting on its haunches and about shoulder height with the truck's hood. We're inches from striking it when it screams like its lungs are overflowing with water and jumps backwards, landing on our side of the barbed wire fence. Then it disappeared. We must get out of here and hurry up, we're going mad. As we approach the outskirts of Gallup, we get pulled over. Travis pulls over with us, which makes the Navajo officer nervous. He asks Travis why he stopped. Travis reports a skinwalker followed us for a few kilometers. The cop quickly goes white, stammers something about a verbal warning, and drives off. We do the same. We didn't see anything again that night, but Travis wouldn't allow us leave without removing a Navajo totem that was said to keep it away. Anyone who's gone to the Navajo reservation has heard or seen skinwalkers. My hometown is in northern Arizona, between the Coyote Reservation and the U.S. Southern Navajo Reservation. A secondary school with 80 kids had to travel 5 to 10 hours one way to play any sport. We traveled a lot on the Navajo reservation and slept in motels when we went out to play. I recall the basketball coach stating the school couldn't afford hotel rooms for the trip. We'd be driving for 12 hours. I was the lone senior male player that season. After our huge game, we took the bus home. We left and after 2 hours of traveling, we arrived at the res, where everyone was sleeping at 2 a.m. After crossing the border, the bus driver drove up to 85 miles per hour. As I peeked out, I saw a man pursuing the bus at 85 miles per hour. The figure was humanoid as it came closer. It appeared perfectly like a person, except for its half-black, half-white face and luminous eyes, like a rabbit's eyes reflecting a spotlight. My God, it's a skinwalker. The skinwalker went to the road's side and kept up with the bus, hurdling sage breasts and pebbles while gazing at me. The skinwalker grinned. This horrible grin with crooked, yellow teeth. I felt like throwing up and panicked during the entire incident. The skinwalker began to collapse on all fours, nevertheless keeping up with the bus. I saw his bones fracture and reassemble as hair grew all over his body. In 3 seconds, he became a coyote and fled out into the desert. I raced to the aboard restroom and puked food and blood. My Navajo acquaintance instructed me to receive a blessing from my friend the chief. Next day he came to me, murmured something in Navajo, waved a feathered scepter, then drove away. I haven't seen another skinwalker since I moved away from that town and the res, and if I have to travel south, I go around far around. About 5 years ago, a handful of my friends and I decided to go on an expedition around 3 a.m. We rode 15 miles to these Spanish ruins in New Mexico, historically the Inquisition's center. My buddy brought a flute, and began playing it in 30 seconds. Playing something, they began yelling loudly on the long, ruined walls. Then came the most terrifying cry imaginable. One of my pals wet his pants and we drove a couple hours to Bandelier National Monument to camp for the weekend. We arrived at 6 or 7 a.m. We pitched tents. Everything became a blur afterwards. When I saw 2 desk demons rushing for me, 2 of my pals motioned for me to follow them. I followed them as though shackled. I followed them for 10 or 15 minutes before waking up. They had my pal's features and cat eyes but red hair and 2 brunette pals. I stopped walking and they gave me their most scary face. I turned around and sprinted back the way I came. After 5 minutes, I reached the rock and located our camp. Everyone was conversing and didn't know I was gone. I alerted them about the doppelganger Skinwalkers, and we left Albuquerque within 10 minutes. My uncle and I had just finished collecting firewood for my grandma, and were driving back on a gravel road at 30 miles per hour, give or take 5. Before I could peek out my passenger side window, I felt watched. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I heard a knock on my window and my uncle prayed loudly in my native tongue. I believed everything was over until our pickup dropped from the bed. My uncle kept urging, "Don't look away," as I heard a tap from behind me. I couldn't breathe and wanted to weep. The vehicle dropped again after a minute. He glanced at me and said, "We'll ask your father to pray in the morning, so evil won't remember our faces." He stated something in Navajo. I recall curled up on the seat and listened to my uncle chant a prayer till we reached my grandmother's home. He stated he didn't see faces after some discussion, just eyes like stoplights. Many Navajo people, including my family, are afraid to talk about skinwalkers because they fear it will attract them. I was raised outside the Navajo Nation and was uninformed about skinwalkers. I doubted everything. My mom used to tell me a tale about how, in the 1980s, she and my aunt witnessed a skinwalker right outside their driveway beneath a streetlight. She described a black dog with a bent noodle-like front limb and burned orange eyes. Being my own clothing, I questioned every word, but I never declared my doubts were permitted. My family and I had just concluded the Navajo Nation Fair Carnival, when we traveled to my grandparents' home in October. We were up until 2 a.m. catching up on family and local news when we arrived about 9 p.m. I asked, "Are skinwalkers real?" At that time, my grandmother yelled with agitation to don't talk about it. After being admonished by my mom, she and my grandpa went to bed, and one of my aunts says they're okay. Your relative experienced nightmares all night and woke up weeping, not wanting to press the misery. We went to bed. It was a great night in the old trailer/home. We slept with the windows open, screens to keep out pests. Everyone was asleep but me. I was taught it's prohibited to think about skinwalkers because it might attract them as a child on the reserve. As I was settling up for sleep, I heard something outside moving. I rise off the sofa and go to the kitchen window and trailer, where all the lights are off and just the porch light is visible. If there was a skinwalker outside, I hoped it wouldn't notice me. So I look out the porch light. All I can see is the dusty terrain, the cars my family drove, and some old metal garbage cans beside the road. I was about to go back to bed, assuming it was a stray cat. I hear a distorted cry outside, near my mounting terror. A coyote-like thing was looking at me from behind the automobiles just beyond the porch light's reach. It looked weird and gave off a terrible sense simply by viewing it. Grey with unkempt hair, its eyes glowed orange-red softly. I screamed and went to my room. At this point, I detected an odor that smelled like decaying flesh. My mother was like, "Oh my God, it's nearly 3 a.m. Why?" She replied, "It's definitely a stray animal since I woke her up. At night, zoo animals wander." I yelled, "There's a Blair Witch Project ship outside my house," to grab her attention. "What's up?" Then we heard. The monster outside began cries and writhing on the ground. So she and I got up and glanced out the window to see the coyote approaching. It limped and dragged its right rear leg like a handicap. We heard it scratching and wailing at the door. My mom and dad shouted in Navajo for the monster to go, saying it's not welcome. All the noise got the rest of the trailer up and into the hallway. My mum pointed to the door and shouted "Skinwalker" as the sounds continued. They were prepared. My granddad pulled a revolver and ashtray from a drawer. He coated a couple bullets, loaded the rifle, and walked directly to the door shouting more Navajo. Then he shot twice. My grandfather couldn't shoot it before it escaped. I've never seen anything faster. My grandfather said, "Next thing you know, my aunts and parents are freaking out over what just transpired, saying things like, 'What if it comes back tomorrow and it's sauce?'" After my grandparents arrived, we all went to bed at 3 a.m. claiming we'd be okay. My grandparents tell a neighbor what occurred in the morning. One of them was a medicine man who participated in Navajo rituals to heal and cure disease. He blessed the family and the outside grounds. When I was 11 or 12, we lived in a mud and stone home similar to ours. Everyone had gone to Jimmy's Vest, leaving me and 2 brothers to oversee the sheep. We were getting ready for night when we heard dogs barking outside, believing it was coyotes. Dogs wouldn't stop barking as we fell asleep. A few hours later, I woke up pretty late. My brother snored and breathed safely in the silent home. I awakened my brother to accompany me to the outhouse. He mocked my fear, which I felt. We took a flashlight to the outhouse and the dogs started barking crazily in the sagebrush. After my brother left, I waited outside. My spotlight followed the hounds. A dog suddenly barked loudly, and then everything was calm. When I heard several dogs going crazy beside the truck, I saw a tall guy with one arm on the cab roof. When he kicked one of the dogs, they all scattered. I saw its face as it stared at me. It had a white face, red eyes, and a black grin. I'm frozen and mute. It walked slowly toward me until it towered above me. I just see blood-red hue. I continued looking into a sheep's eyes as you chopped its neck. My brother emerged from the outhouse. The creature glanced up then. My brother was too preoccupied with his buckle to notice anything. Long hands hovered inches from my head as the creature smelled of death. I couldn't move or talk. The skinwalker moved toward my brother, who fell immobilized as it approached. When it reached an arm toward his head, something snapped in me. I became furious. I escaped the trance and pounced at the skinwalker, baring my fangs. I surprised me by growling. I was outraged at what was hurting us. When I grew angry, its grin disappeared. Finally, I roared primal at it. It tumbled backwards and rushed into the night, its eyes dull and hazy, its grin gone since the following morning. After telling my parents about the feast, they hired a medical man. I'd ask my mum to tell me a skinwalker tale on road trips to her Navajo reservation routes. I recall every tale she told me as we were traveling through miles of nothing at night. Happily, nothing occurred. My aunt and her pals used to party often. They'd get in a beat-up van and drink in the country. After sundown on the Navajo reservation, people were doing this. They hear pebbles being hurled at their vehicle. Rocks cease being hurled, and then something leaps on the vehicle roof. My family had a white van for road vacations since it fit my brothers and myself. So image a little me being told the tale in a vehicle terrified, everyone panics and locks every door. My auntie leaps in the driver's seat and attempts to start the motor, but the battered up van refuses to start. My auntie freaks out when a hand with long nails scratches the windshield. At this point in the story, my mom would take one hand off the steering wheel and scratch the windshield to simulate it. Then whatever was on the roof jumps off. Everyone is still freaking out, yelling at my auntie to start the van, and that's when she sees the Skinwalker walk up to the driver's side window and stare at her. My aunt got in the back and prayed for her life. After a few minutes, the Skinwalker leaves, and my auntie drives off. My aunt and her 2 boys were home alone while my grandparents attended a conference. Like many reserve residents, they had no power. My aunt and uncles were getting ready for bed after an hour of darkness. My uncle noticed a guy near the vehicle from the front window. This was out of the usual since the nearest neighbor was miles away, yet whatever it was unlocked the truck door and searched through my family's belongings. My aunt and uncles were worried and realized they must act. They each took a turn holding the weapon. They opened the door and fired at the shadowy figure. Unfazed by the weapon, the figure turned and approached them. As the stranger got closer, headlights came up the road. The person stared at the lights, moved away, and hid behind a tree near the home as my grandparents returned. My uncle went toward the vehicle with the pistol, my grandpa stepped out of the car, and my uncle pointed to the tree, which was peeking out to watch. My grandpa went into the house, took some ashes from the stove, and covered a bullet with ash. He stepped out onto the porch and shot at the tree, but it didn't go off. After the gunshot, the dark figure ran. My aunt was chased inside by my grandma, uncles, and grandpa. There were few roads or trails, so my grandpa and uncle's vehicle bounced and their headlights weren't fixed. My uncle says he witnessed a lady running on all fours in the headlights. My grandpa stopped the vehicle beside a 20-foot ditch and yelled in Navajo. My uncle claims he was ranting about a local lady, that he wasn't terrified, and to leave his family alone. My grandfather's yelled at lady had died a few days later. I've always heard that naming a skinwalker would kill them.